Hi, I'm Johnny from UltimatePaperMache.com, and in my last video I showed you this armature that I made for a gnome. A lot of people have already started their own gnome, as a matter of fact, so if you haven't yet, and if you haven't even seen the video, I'm going to put a link to the video and to the pattern on my website down below in the description so that you can go and get those. Now in this video I'm going to go ahead and finish him up. Now I am going to put my gnome outside, so I'm not going to use paper mache or paper mache clay, but you could if you wanted to. So during this whole process, when it comes to the point where you could use something different than what I'm using, I'll go ahead and let you know some other options that you have. Now in my last videos, actually the last two videos, I told you that I'm doing an experiment to see if we can find ways to use the same skills that we have for paper mache sculptures, like building the armature, but then use waterproof materials on the outside so that they can stay outside. And we already know that epoxy clay works because I made a squirrel that has been out for, I think it's been 4 years now, somewhere in winter in Minnesota, and he looks exactly the same way he did when I first put him out there. But epoxy clay gets kind of expensive. I'm hoping to make things that are even bigger than this guy, so I really want something that costs a little bit less money. So I'm going to use the same materials that I used on the pumpkin that I started this whole experiment with in 2 videos ago. I'll put a link to that one down below. And in order to get started on that, I need to put some masking tape over him. I'm going to use frog tape. I got mine at Walmart, and I'm just going to cover up this foil. You can use just regular masking tape too. If you don't have frog tape, just use whatever you got. The reason that I'm doing that is because the next step in my hard coating that I'm going to put on this guy requires me to put on a layer of plaster cloth, and plaster cloth does not stick to aluminum foil. Most things won't. But if you're making a house gnome and you want to make it out of paper mache clay, you don't need to put the masking tape over it. But if you're going to be using paper strips and paste, you'll have to use masking tape over the foil. Otherwise, the paper strips and paste will just slide off. So those are your options. So now I've got him all covered up with the masking tape. He looks pretty cool when he's green. I like him. But now I'm going to go get the plaster cloth. Now, of course, if you're making a house gnome out of paper mache clay, you don't need any plaster cloth under it. You also don't need any plaster cloth, obviously, if you're covering your gnome with paper strips and paste. But I kind of like using paper strips and paste over plaster cloth because you only need like one layer. All you're doing really is covering up the texture of the cloth, and the plaster cloth provides all the strength that you would need. It goes on a lot faster that way. But obviously don't need to, because I'm going to use the same hard coat that I used on my pumpkin last month. I do need to use plaster cloth. The grout that I'm going to put over it has no structural strength whatsoever. It just waterproofs, but it doesn't have any, it doesn't hold them together. So I really do need the plaster cloth. Now I've got some plastic down on my table because this is a messy process for sure. I've got some plaster cloth. It's 4-inch wide medical grade plaster cloth. I really like it. It's a little higher quality than what you usually get in the hobby stores, but use whatever you have, of course. I'm going to put my warm water over here on the other side of the table because I don't want this water dripping on this plaster cloth until I'm ready to use it, because it gets all hard lumps in it. I like to put 2 pieces at a time together. It's warm water rather than cold, although I don't know if that makes any difference. And you do need to rub it so that the plaster fills in all the spaces between the little threads in the cloth. So now I'm going to let him dry out and probably leave him overnight. Remember that this water that you just got plaster in, you do not pour this in your sink, because if you do, you're going to have to call the plumber. So now we're all ready to put on the second portion of the hard coat. And for this one, I'm going to be using something that's a little bit different from what the people used in the video that encouraged me to try this whole waterproofing outdoor sculpture idea. In their video, they used a product called Flex Bond Thin Set Mortar. I can't get any of that locally, so I went to my local Lowe's and I bought a product called Mapai Ultracolor Grout. Now, grout and mortar, I don't think it's exactly the same thing, but it worked really well with my pumpkin. All of this is experimental because, you know, we haven't left him outside all year yet. So I'm going to go ahead and start mixing this up. I'm going to use approximately 1 part water to 3 parts of the powdered grout. And I'm just going to mix it up with a stick. You might want to actually follow the directions that are on the bag. And also, remember when I said that you don't want to put the plaster water in your pipes? That's doubly true for this. I just found out that if you get your gloves wet, just a little bit damp, you can smooth it off. I mean, not perfectly, but it's a whole lot smoother than it was. Definitely use gloves though. Don't just stick your fingers in this stuff. We have no idea what's in it. I like the fact that the grout is smoothing off most of the plaster cloth texture, you know, because it's bumpy. You can never really get the plaster cloth entirely smooth no matter how hard you try. And this is smoothing that off really nicely. Some parts are kind of hard to get to. And this little thing, it's a little spatula, silicone spatula. It's really helping out because that foam brush just wouldn't get in there. Now I've got a spot, you can see right here by his elbow where water is going to collect. I didn't want that to happen. Really, really didn't. Hopefully, yeah, I think we can do it. I'm going to put some more in there and just kind of make a little pathway for the water to get out. The reason we don't want water, of course, is because it gets bigger when it freezes, and that would crack the sculpture. I think as long as it's got a pathway to get out, it should be fine. There, that works. So now I'm just going to smooth it off just a little bit more. Then I'm going to put him in front of the furnace vent to let him dry. That shouldn't take more than a couple of hours. I'm just going to mix up some more. I'm using more water this time because I want a almost paint-like consistency. This one's to go on kind of fast. I'm trying to make sure that I cover every little bit of it with this second coat. It's not easy because it's the same color as the first one. Because I put more water in it, this is going on a lot smoother. I sort of hit the wrong button and put him out of focus for a little while, you probably noticed. And because of that, you probably couldn't tell that I used a chip brush for his beard and his mustache. It's got a little bit of texture because I folded up some of the plaster cloth in there to give it some wrinkles. Then the first coat of the grout went on just with the foam brush, but I did add a little bit of texture with that too, and then I finished it up with the chip brush. You can't see a whole lot of brush marks in there, but I think there's a really nice texture. It's going to turn out really nice once that's white against his blue tunic. I think it's really going to be cool. It feels really hard already, and it's only been sitting here for maybe 2 or 3 hours, but I'm still going to leave it overnight, and then we'll finish it up tomorrow. So now he's all ready to get his face. I left him overnight. It is cured. It's nice and hard. I did spray it with this clear varnish just to seal it up. I felt it might make it a little bit easier to paint it, and mostly I did it because that's what I did on the pumpkin, and pumpkin's doing really well. Maybe it adds just one last little bit of protection against the water. I don't know, but we'll see. Now I'm going to be using Magic Sculpt for his face, and I bought really big tubs. Obviously it's got a little face, you don't need to get so much. So if you're going to use some form of epoxy clay on your gnome, you don't need to buy a whole bunch. You can get it in 1 pound containers. If you're using a paper mache or paper mache clay for your gnome, you don't need epoxy clay of any kind. You can just use an air dry clay, either my recipe or one that you buy at the store. The first thing we need to do, no matter what brand you're using, is to get out equal amounts of each. That's not always easy to do. I suppose you could get a scale. I'm not going to. And I don't need very much. I mean, I'm going to use a really small amount of this stuff. You can always mix up more if you need to. You do not want to mix them up in the buckets. Like I'm using my left hand to pull out the hardener, and I'm going to use my right hand to pull out the resin. This is true no matter which brand you're using. You don't want to get little bits of the hardener in the resin in the tub, because otherwise you'll end up with little hard bits next time you go to use it. And you don't need to be, you know, totally precise. Like I'm just eyeballing it. This is not quite big enough. That looks about right. Put the lid back on. Now you can see that I'm just going to keep folding this over. I'm going to do this for a long time. I'm not going to make you watch the whole thing. But I'm probably going to keep mixing this for, you know, at least a couple of minutes, because I don't want to have any of those changes in color in there. I want it to be all one color, no stripes whatsoever. It would be totally mixed up. Now you do definitely need the gloves. I know a lot of people out online say that you don't need the gloves because it's non-toxic. I am not believing them. I've done some research on the subject, and I'm pretty darn sure that you need the gloves. Any epoxy clay, no matter which brand, can be smoothed off with water. That's what I've got on my finger right now. I worked on him for a little while after the camera turned off so I could see him just a little bit better. When he's facing the camera, I'm looking at him from the side, so I can't see him very well when you can see him. If you know of a video that's been put out by a sculptor who shows the kind of equipment that she has set up in her studio so that she can see what she's sculpting at the same time you can, please let me know. It would be hugely helpful. It's really frustrating to not be able to do that, and I have some plans for some animal portraits that I want to do with wet clay, and I'm just really reluctant to even start them until I have the studio set up so that we can both see what I'm doing at the same time. But anyway, at this point, I decided he was done. And then I let him sit there for 3 or 4 hours while I was doing something else, and I finally decided, nah, it's just not right. It wasn't the way I wanted him to look, and so now he looks like this. My theory is that if you don't like it when you think it's done, it probably isn't done yet. So just keep working until you do like it. I'm really liking him now. He's got a face that I could live with. And now the epoxy needs to sit and cure for 24 hours. Then it needs to get painted. That's the very last thing we need to do. We are so close. So I left him overnight to cure, and then I got up early this morning and gave him a coat of this white primer. And I think all primer that comes in a spray can be used indoors or outdoors, but you do want to make sure. Now I'm going to do the painting pretty fast, partly because I want to hurry up and get this video done, but also because I'm going to be using the gnome book for my model, and all of the little gnomes are, well, you probably can't see this guy, but it's just, he's got a blue tunic, he's got a red hat, brown pants, white beard. So really, really simple, and we're going to let the sculpture itself provide all of the details. So now he's really, really close to being done, but I want to give him at least one coat of exterior varnish, and I don't happen to have any. I have to run to the store and get some. I am going to put him outside. The pumpkin's still out there now, and it's after Halloween, so he's got to come in. This guy's going to go out. I'll leave him all year, hopefully, unless something happens to him. I will keep you posted. Like I said at the beginning, this is an experiment. The pumpkin has held up really well, though. It's been rained on, I mean deluge. It's been snowed on. Just a couple of days ago, it got down to below 0 Fahrenheit, and he's holding up still. It's showing no signs whatsoever of any damage. He's not getting soft like any paper mache would. So I'm really hoping that this guy is going to last all year. And if it does, I'm going to consider the experiment to be a total success. If you haven't already started your gnome, you can get the pattern at ultimatepapermache.com/gnome. And there's also a video. Obviously, I'll put a link to that down below. I mentioned a few other videos while I was working on this. I'll put links to all of them down in the description. So go check those out, go make something, and then come visit me at ultimatepapermache.com. I'll see you there.